My name is Kira Valdez, and I want you to picture this. I'm sitting in the conference room at 9:30 in the morning, and our HR director, Pamela, just finished telling everyone that bonuses are canceled this year because we're tight on budget. I'm looking around at my coworkers' faces, and I can see the disappointment. But here's the thing. I had just brought in 6 major contracts in my first year. 6. Contracts worth over $2 million in revenue, and they're telling me there's no money for bonuses. But that's not even the part that made me want to burn everything down. 3 days later, I walked past the executive conference room and saw catering being set up for their quarterly retreat planning meeting. Salmon, fancy desserts, the whole thing. Then I noticed the architectural plans spread across the table. They were renovating the executive floor. New furniture, marble countertops, some kind of meditation room. That's when I realized they weren't broke. They just didn't think I deserved anything. Before I go deeper into what happened, could you please take a few seconds to tell me in the comments where you're listening from? Because I want to know where my story reaches. And also like, subscribe, and click the bell icon, because what I'm about to tell you is going to show you exactly how I made them pay for every single month they made me wait. So here I am, 26 years old, working for this massive consulting firm that basically runs half the corporate training programs in the country. My job was bringing in new clients, and I was ridiculously good at it. Like scary good. I could read people in meetings, figure out exactly what they needed to hear, and close deals that other people spent months trying to land. But the executives? They treated me like I was lucky to be there. The CEO was this guy named Thornton Webb, who had this way of looking right through you when you talked. Like you weren't important enough to register in his brain. The CFO, Gwendolyn Parks, was even worse. She'd ask me to repeat myself constantly, like she couldn't be bothered to listen the first time. And the VP of sales, this woman named Cordelia Nash, would actually interrupt me mid-sentence to ask if I'd considered more traditional approaches. Traditional approaches, when I was outselling everyone else by 30%. So when they canceled bonuses, I didn't argue. I didn't complain. I just smiled and said I understood these were challenging times. And then I went home and started planning. See, most people would have looked for another job, maybe filed a complaint. But I realized something during those first few weeks after the bonus announcement. These people had made a huge mistake. They'd shown me exactly who they were, and they had no idea who I was. I started paying attention, real attention, not just to the work, but to them, how they moved through the office, what made them nervous, who they talked to, what they were afraid of. Thornton Webb, our CEO, had this habit of clearing his throat before he lied, and he lied constantly. About knowing details he didn't know, about being involved in decisions he'd never heard of, about understanding technical aspects of our programs that he couldn't explain if his life depended on it. He was terrified someone would figure out he was basically just a good-looking guy with an MBA who'd never actually done the work. Gwendolyn Parks, the CFO, was obsessed with being right about financial projections. She'd spend hours crafting these conservative estimates, and then when anyone suggested different numbers, she'd get this look on her face like they'd personally attacked her. She couldn't handle being wrong about money, especially not in front of other people. And Cordelia Nash? She was desperate to prove she was irreplaceable. She'd take credit for other people's ideas, volunteer for projects she couldn't handle, and constantly name drop about her relationships with important clients. But here's what I noticed. Those client relationships were mostly her calling them once every few months to check in. She wasn't actually bringing in business anymore. For 8 months, I watched them. I learned their schedules, their insecurities, their weak spots. I started noticing things like how Thornton would panic if board members asked technical questions during presentations, how Gwendolyn would second-guess herself if anyone challenged her projections with industry data, how Cordelia would get defensive if anyone implied her role might not be essential. And while I was learning all of this, I kept doing my job, bringing in clients, exceeding targets, being the perfect employee who never complained about anything. But I was also doing something else. I was positioning myself. See, our company had this annual board presentation every September. It was the biggest deal of the year. The board would fly in from all over the country, and the executives would present the yearly performance, future projections, strategic initiatives, all of it. It was basically their chance to prove they deserved their jobs for another year. And I realized that was my opportunity. I started reaching out to board members months in advance. Not directly, obviously, but I'd make sure to be involved in client meetings when board members were visiting. I'd send detailed reports that would occasionally get forwarded up to them. I'd volunteer to help with research for presentations, which meant I got to see exactly what information the executives were planning to present. More importantly, I got to see what information they weren't planning to present. By July, I had a clear picture of what was going to happen in September. Thornton was going to present our yearly growth numbers, but he didn't actually understand how we'd achieved that growth. Gwendolyn was going to project conservative numbers for next year that were way below industry standards. And Cordelia was going to take credit for client retention numbers that were actually driven by customer service improvements she'd opposed. That's when I started planting seeds. I began having casual conversations with our biggest clients about industry trends they'd heard about, new approaches to corporate training, data they'd seen about what other companies were investing in. I wasn't telling them anything directly, but I was getting them curious about things our executives couldn't answer. I also started researching everything I could about our competitors, not just their basic information, but deep research. Their actual performance numbers, their new initiatives, their success rates with different types of programs, information that would make our conservative projections look completely out of touch. And here's the really clever part. I made sure board members knew I was the one doing this research, not by bragging or showing off, but by being helpful. When they'd ask questions during their visits, I'd have the exact information they needed. When they'd wonder about industry trends, I'd quietly send them articles. I became their go-to person for real information. By August, I could see it working. Board members were starting to ask more detailed questions during their calls with executives. Questions about technical aspects of our programs, about industry comparisons, about strategic planning that went beyond just maintaining what we already had. And the executives were starting to sweat. Thornton began staying late more often, trying to cram information he should have known all along. Gwendolyn started second-guessing her projections, asking for more and more data to support her conservative estimates. Cordelia began trying to insert herself into client meetings she'd never cared about before. But none of them realized what was happening. They just thought the board was being more demanding this year. Meanwhile, I was preparing for September like it was the most important performance of my life. Because it was. I had spent 8 months studying these people like they were lab specimens. I knew exactly what would make them panic, exactly what would expose their weaknesses, and exactly how to make sure I was standing right there when everything fell apart, ready to step in and fix what they couldn't. The week before the September presentation, I could feel the tension in the office. Thornton was snapping at people over tiny mistakes. Gwendolyn was working through lunch every day, frantically checking and rechecking numbers. Cordelia was sending emails at all hours, trying to gather last-minute client testimonials to strengthen her presentation. And I was calm. Completely, utterly calm. Because I knew something they didn't know. I knew that in 72 hours, their careers were going to implode, and there wouldn't be a single thing they could do to stop it. Not because I was going to sabotage them, but because I was going to help them sabotage themselves. The board presentation was scheduled for Thursday morning at 10 o'clock. By Friday afternoon, the entire executive structure of our company was going to be completely different. And on Monday morning, I was going to walk into the office as the new regional director, with a salary that was triple what I'd been making, plus the bonus they'd refused to give me, plus a year-end profit-sharing agreement that would set me up for life. But none of them saw it coming, not even a little bit. Thursday morning arrived like Christmas morning for me. I got to the office early, made sure I looked professional but not trying too hard, and positioned myself in the back of the boardroom where I could see everything unfold. The board members filed in at 9:30. 7 people who controlled the future of our company, and I'd spent months making sure they trusted my judgment more than they trusted our executives. Not because I'd told them to, but because I'd consistently given them better information than anyone else. Thornton started the presentation right on time. He looked confident, had his usual fake smile, began with the standard overview of our yearly performance. Everything seemed normal. Then board member Patricia Hoffman raised her hand. Thornton, before we go further, I'm curious about the technical methodology behind our highest performing client programs. Can you walk us through the specific frameworks that generated these results? I watched Thornton's face, and there it was, the throat clearing. He had no idea what frameworks we actually used because he'd never bothered to learn them. He started talking about innovative approaches and synergistic solutions, which meant absolutely nothing. Patricia looked confused. I'm sorry. Could you be more specific? Which particular assessment tools are we implementing? And how do they compare to industry standards? This was beautiful. See, Patricia had asked me about this exact topic 2 weeks earlier. I'd given her a detailed breakdown of our actual methodologies, showed her comparative data with our competitors, explained why our approach was working. She knew I understood this stuff inside and out. But Thornton? He was drowning. Well, Patricia, that's really more of an operational detail that my team handles. The important thing is the results we're seeing. Actually, interrupted board member David Chen, I'd like to understand those operational details. They seem crucial to evaluating whether our success is sustainable. Another question I'd prepared David for, without him realizing it. During his last visit, I'd casually mentioned some research I'd done about long-term sustainability in corporate training programs. I'd planted the seed that this was something worth asking about. Thornton looked like he wanted to disappear. He started stammering about bringing in subject matter experts to answer technical questions, which made him look completely incompetent in front of people who needed to believe he was running the company. That's when Gwendolyn jumped in to save him. Big mistake. Perhaps we should move to the financial projections where I can provide the detailed analysis you're looking for. Gwendolyn opened her presentation, and I could see she was nervous but trying to project confidence. She launched into her conservative projections for next year, talking about maintaining steady growth and avoiding unnecessary risks. Board member Michael Torres raised his hand. Gwendolyn, these projections seem quite conservative compared to industry benchmarks. Are we potentially leaving money on the table? Perfect. Michael had asked me about industry benchmarks just last month. I'd sent him comprehensive data showing that companies like ours were typically growing much faster than Gwendolyn's projections suggested. Not because I was trying to undermine her, but because he'd asked and I'd given him accurate information. Well, Michael, I believe in prudent financial planning. It's better to exceed conservative expectations than to fall short of aggressive ones. But, said Patricia, if our competitors are achieving 15 to 20% growth and we're projecting 8%, aren't we basically planning to fall behind? I had given Patricia those exact competitor numbers 3 weeks ago when she'd asked about market trends. Gwendolyn's face went white because she knew Patricia was right, but admitting it would mean admitting her projections were inadequate. Well, those numbers can be misleading depending on how you calculate. Actually, David jumped in. I have data here showing that most firms in our sector are projecting double-digit growth. Are we missing opportunities our competitors are seeing? Gwendolyn started backtracking, trying to explain why her numbers were more realistic, but she sounded defensive and unprepared. You could see the board members exchanging glances, wondering why their CFO didn't seem to understand basic industry trends. Then Cordelia made her fatal mistake. She tried to rescue the situation by taking over. If I may, I think what we're missing here is the strength of our client relationships. My team has maintained exceptional retention rates, and I've personally managed relationships with our top-tier clients for years. Board member Jennifer Walsh looked interested. That's great to hear, Cordelia. Can you tell us about your recent interactions with those top-tier clients? What feedback are they giving you about future needs? This was the moment I'd been waiting for. Jennifer had asked me this exact question 2 months ago, and I'd given her detailed insights about what our major clients were actually saying about their future training needs. Information I'd gathered by actually talking to them regularly, not just calling to check in once a quarter. Cordelia started talking about general satisfaction and positive relationships, but she couldn't provide specifics because she didn't have regular substantive contact with these clients anymore. I'm sorry, said Michael, but when you say you've managed these relationships, how often are you actually speaking with decision makers at these companies? Cordelia's voice got tighter. Well, I maintain regular contact through various channels. Because, Jennifer continued, I was under the impression that most of our day-to-day client interaction is handled by our account management team. Are you saying you're personally involved in their ongoing needs assessment? I watched Cordelia realize she'd walked into a trap. She couldn't claim to be managing relationships she wasn't actually managing, but admitting the truth would make her look irrelevant. I oversee the strategic aspects of those relationships. But not the operational aspects? Patricia asked. So when clients have specific needs or concerns, they're not coming to you directly? It was falling apart beautifully. Each executive was being exposed for exactly what I knew they were. Thornton didn't understand the technical work. Gwendolyn didn't understand the market. And Cordelia wasn't actually managing client relationships. Then David asked the question that destroyed everything. This is concerning. If our CEO doesn't understand our methodologies, our CFO is projecting below market growth, and our VP of sales isn't directly managing key client relationships, who is actually running the strategic aspects of this company? The room went silent. I could see all three executives looking at each other, realizing they'd just been completely exposed in front of the board. That's when Thornton made the worst decision of his career. He tried to throw everyone else under the bus. David, I think what we're seeing here is a breakdown in communication between departments. My team has been working on strategic initiatives that perhaps haven't been properly coordinated with finance and sales. Gwendolyn's mouth dropped open. Excuse me? My projections are based on information provided by your office. Well, Cordelia jumped in. Maybe if there was better communication about strategic initiatives, sales would be better positioned to speak to client relationships. And there it was. They started arguing with each other in front of the board, pointing fingers, contradicting each other, making it obvious that they had no idea what each other was doing. Jennifer looked directly at me. Kira, you've been quiet back there. You work closely with all these departments. What's your perspective on our strategic coordination? This was my moment. 8 months of preparation led to this exact question. Well, I said, standing up calmly, I think what we're seeing is the difference between high-level oversight and operational knowledge. Our programs are actually performing very well, but the metrics we use to measure success and the client feedback we receive daily don't always get communicated up through traditional reporting channels. I pulled out my tablet. For example, our technical methodologies are actually quite advanced compared to competitors, but they're complex systems that require hands-on experience to explain properly. Our financial performance could support much more aggressive growth projections, but only if we're tracking the right metrics and understanding market opportunities. And our client relationships are stronger than ever, but that's because we've shifted to more frequent, substantive interactions that go beyond traditional account management. The board members were nodding. Finally, someone was giving them clear, confident answers. Can you elaborate on those market opportunities? Michael asked. For the next 20 minutes, I walked them through everything. Real technical explanations of our methodologies, detailed market analysis showing where we could grow, specific client feedback about emerging needs, information I'd been gathering for months while the executives focused on presentations and politics. By the time I finished, the contrast was obvious. The executives looked confused and defensive. I looked prepared and competent. Patricia asked the question that ended their careers. Kira, in your opinion, what would need to change for us to reach our full potential as a company? Honestly, I said, I think we need leadership that understands our work at an operational level, financial planning that reflects market realities, and client relationship management that focuses on ongoing value creation rather than periodic check-ins. The talent and systems are here. We just need strategic direction that's based on actual knowledge rather than assumptions. David nodded slowly. That's very insightful. Thank you. The meeting ended with the board requesting private time to discuss what they'd heard. The executives filed out looking like they'd been hit by a truck. Over the next 2 weeks, everything happened exactly like I'd planned. The board called individual meetings with each executive. Thornton couldn't answer basic questions about company operations. Gwendolyn couldn't defend her projections when challenged with industry data. Cordelia couldn't provide evidence of her strategic value to client relationships. Meanwhile, I kept doing my job perfectly, kept providing valuable insights to board members when they asked, kept demonstrating that I understood every aspect of the business they were concerned about. On the last Friday of September, Thornton was given a choice: resign or face a vote of no confidence. He resigned. Gwendolyn accepted an early retirement package. Cordelia transferred to a subsidiary company where she could focus on relationship maintenance without strategic responsibilities. On Monday morning, October 1st, I walked into the office as the new regional director of strategic development. My salary had tripled. I received the bonus they'd denied me, plus back pay for the 8 months I'd waited, plus a profit-sharing agreement that guaranteed me a percentage of all new revenue I generated. But here's the most beautiful part. They never figured out what happened. They just thought the board had become more demanding, that market pressures had exposed their weaknesses, that timing had worked against them. They had no idea that for 8 months, I'd been systematically studying their insecurities and creating situations where those insecurities would destroy them. The company is doing better than ever now. We're growing at 22% annually. Client satisfaction is up, revenue is up, and every month when I get my profit-sharing check, I remember that meeting in September when they told me there was no money for bonuses. Sometimes people ask me how I did it, how I went from being dismissed to being in charge in less than a year. The answer is simple. I paid attention, I learned, and I waited for the right moment to show them who they were really dealing with. They thought they could treat me like I didn't matter. Instead, they taught me exactly how to make sure I was the only one who mattered. So if you're in a situation where people are underestimating you, where they're treating you like you don't deserve recognition for your work, remember this story. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting everything. If this story inspired you, hit that like button and tell me in the comments what moment hit you the hardest. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Because sometimes people need to know that patience, preparation, and paying attention can be the most powerful weapons you have.